Hey Amber, guess what day it is?
Well, I do believe it's Tuesday.
It is, and it's another episode of True Crime and Chill. Okay, so Amber, I looked at our stats recently and holy crap, we have over 12,000 downloads.
I know, I can't believe it. It's amazing. We have downloads in multiple countries, and one of our episodes actually almost has 1,000 downloads.
Right? That is insane, dude. Okay, so we do thank you guys so much because we wouldn't even have that much. Shoot, we wouldn't even have like 100 downloads if we didn't have you guys as such a loyal fan base.
It's so nice to know that we have found our tribe. And I know we've said it before where we started this thing not really sure where it was going to go. So it's great to know that we're creating something that some people continue to enjoy just like we do.
Exactly. So for now, let's get on with the show.
Let's.
So our story starts with Theresa Cross, who was born on March 16th, 1946 in Sacramento, California. She was actually the youngest of two siblings. Her mother and father both worked pretty decent jobs. Her father had such a great job that he actually ended up moving them to Rio Linda and bought them a really nice house, and it was really good for the family. But unfortunately, a few years later, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's. So he actually ended up having to quit his job, which caused him to drink really heavily and kind of just mentally and verbally abuse the whole family. Um, it also caused his wife to have to basically take on the burden of working a full time job as a woman back then and paying for all the bills, including the house. Theresa was actually really close to her mother, so it was a huge blow to the girl when her mom ended up passing away from heart failure, and that also caused them to lose the income to pay for the house. So her father actually ended up having to move them away. It also caused them to be just a little bit more abusive towards Theresa and her siblings as well.
As most stories were back then, and unfortunately, even today.
Exactly. So eventually, Theresa turns, the ripe old age of 16 and literally gets married to a man that's 5 years older than her named Clifford Sanders. Clifford and Theresa, she ended up getting married, dropping out of high school, and immediately getting pregnant all within a year.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So she had their son, Howard Sanders. However, Howard did not make the rocky relationship any better. In fact, Clifford eventually got really tired of how jealous Theresa was. She actually accused him of cheating so much that they got into a fight, and she ended up calling the cops saying that he beat her. However, she didn't want to press charges, so all charges were dropped. However, a month later, Clifford went out with some friends for his birthday, and Theresa was not happy about it. After arguing with him, she ended up pulling out a rifle and shooting him in the back.
Oh my gosh. That's jealousy at a whole new level.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. So Theresa was obviously arrested and charged with Clifford's murder, right?
Right.
She tried to be like, oh, the whole battered woman card. He got drunk and abused us constantly. I was scared for my life. I thought that he was going to kill us. Just really playing up the victim card. But
Self-defense. Mm-hmm.
yeah, but people would get up, neighbors and friends and family of Clifford's and stuff would get up and be like, Clifford wasn't like that. In fact, it was very much Theresa who was super jealous and all that stuff. And Theresa's own sister had gotten up on the stand and had said that Theresa would rather kill Clifford than let him go.
So I can see she was true to her word.
Well, yes. Theresa ended up getting acquitted of this murder, actually. And she basically just moved on with her life. She shot this man in the back in cold blood and just whatever, and moved on with her life. She married 3 more times, okay, while having 6 children, including Howard, all throughout these 3 marriages.
Oh, she was busy, it looks like.
Yeah, one of them was a guy who was in the military who divorced her because he was tired of the fact that she was constantly saying that he was cheating on her when she was cheating on him. She dated another guy from a veterans association who ended up she just dated that one, but he ended up leaving her because she was always leaving the kids with him. So it was just in the end, it was her basically doing all the cheating and all the running around and stuff like that.
There is a thing about it's really easy to accuse people of things when it's something that you would do.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So it's easy to imagine somebody else would do it if it's something that you're willing to do.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. So she was apparently trying to find, the rich husband or the husband that would take care of her and all these kids, but it never really worked out. So Theresa ended up moving her children from Orangevale, California to Sacramento to a tiny little 2-bedroom. Now that's 7 people crammed into a 2-bedroom apartment. However, that's when people kind of started noticing the abuse more. In Orangevale, Theresa only really verbally abused her kids. Like, she disconnected the phone. She refused them to have any, visitors, stuff like that. She never really, laid hands on them. In Sacramento, it just got worse. As our children got older, Theresa started to abuse them more and more. But she actually really just focused on her 2 eldest daughters, Susan and Sheila. She would beat them, tie them to beds, force them to defecate on themselves, starve them, just be absolutely terrible to them.
What kind of mother is she? I mean, it sounds like she was jealous of them because they were putting their attention somewhere. Correct me if I'm wrong, this sounds highly almost like a narcissistic personality syndrome.
Yes and no. I mean, it was jealousy, but it wasn't jealousy because they were putting their attention somewhere. It was jealousy because, these were 2 really pretty girls. And throughout all 4 marriages, Theresa kind of let herself go. With all the drinking and stuff, she kind of gained weight and, she got in gray hairs and, she felt like her beauty was gone and that her kids had, taken it. So she actually ended up handcuffing Susan to the kitchen table and beating her so bad she couldn't go to school and that she ended up actually having to drop out of school. In fact, she made all of them drop out around or before the 8th grade. I don't think any of her kids actually finished the 8th grade. So now in 1983, Theresa thought that Susan was casting spells on her so she would be fat and unattractive. Susan obviously denied ever doing that, but Theresa was so convinced that she tried to convince Susan's youngest sister, Terry, to actually shoot Susan. However, Terry refused, obviously. So Theresa grabs the gun and shoots her daughter in the back. Terry is actually on record saying she shot Susan and Susan walked into the bathroom and just fell into the tub, and Mom went in and handcuffed her to the sink. Susan ended up making it through the shooting, surprisingly, but it was with Theresa and her siblings basically nursing her back to health through the attack.
I mean, clearly she has an MO, shooting people in the back,
right?
Which is a cowardly thing to do. I mean, shooting anybody in malice with the intent of hurting them with, like that is bad enough, but then shooting them in the back when they can't even defend themselves.
Right? This is her own kid. It was... So, it gets worse. So, in 1984, Susan and Theresa get into another fight that ended when Theresa stabbed Susan with a pair of scissors, okay? Susan, obviously fed up with everything, said she was leaving and she was actually going to move to Alaska with a friend. Her mother said, sure, but the bullet needs to come out of your back first. So the whole reason why she wanted the bullet out of Susan's back was because she didn't want any evidence that she had actually abused her children going out into the world.
Oh, shocker.
So Theresa fed her daughter some whiskey and pain pills that basically knocked her on her ass and knocked her out. And she took an X-Acto knife. She tried to get her... I found a lot of conflicting reports. Some say that her son actually did it. She got her son to do it. And some say that she tried to get him to do it and he just didn't do it. So she did it herself. But either way, somebody took an X-Acto knife and ended up slicing down Susan's back and cutting the bullet out of her back. Susan was once again handcuffed to the kitchen table and she couldn't move. They actually ended up making her wear diapers and shit because she was defecating on herself. So, unfortunately, the girl started developing sepsis and it started to take a turn for the worse, and Theresa knew that she needed to take care of what was going on. A few days after the bullet was removed, Theresa and her sons packed up all of Susan's things, Susan herself, and then loaded everything into the car and headed to Squaw Valley, up Route 80. They put the girl on top of her stuff, and then Theresa doused her in lighter fluid and set her on fire before they drove away. She was found the following day, but was not able to be identified due to the fact of how burned she was. And, it was the 60s. So, and, it was the 80s. So, they probably didn't have great, DNA right there, from burned victims. So, unfortunately, she was considered a Jane Doe. But an autopsy did show that she was actually still alive when the fire was set.
That's horrific.
So I heard this entire episode on my way to work because I listened to Cold Case Files, the podcast, on my way to work, right? I heard this entire episode on there and I was like, this episode is nuts. So listeners out there, I will have a link to the actual podcast and stuff. So if you would like to listen to that one too, you can go ahead and listen to that one. It has like a different take on this and everything. So this woman goes back to her home, okay, with her two sons that just helped her basically commit murder. She ends up channeling all her rage onto Sheila next and just terrorizes this poor girl. Like, she ends up forcing her into prostitution to pay for the family because Theresa wasn't working. And so she wasn't getting paid by the state of California. And for a few weeks, she was actually really happy with the money that Sheila was making and bringing in and stuff. And then all of a sudden, she ended up becoming really angry with her again. This time it was because she thought that Sheila had an STD and was pregnant, and that Sheila gave the STD to her mother by way of toilet seat.
What the hell is wrong with this woman?
Now, anybody with a basic sexual education class knows that you cannot transmit sexually transmitted diseases by way of toilet seat. But I mean, go off, Theresa. So, obviously neither was true. Sheila was not only not pregnant, nor did she have an STD, but Theresa didn't want to admit this, and she just wanted to torture her kid. So this led Theresa to actually hogtie her daughter, beat her, and lock her in a hot closet with no ventilation, food, or water. Okay. Terry Knorr later said, quote, she, Theresa, wanted Sheila to confess. That was mother's way. Beat them until they confess, unquote.
Just a second. Okay. Sort of like the witch trials, right? Where basically, it was do everything they can to get a confession and then kill them anyway.
Yeah. So Sheila actually admitted to having the STD and being pregnant, even though it wasn't true. Like, she's like, oh, okay, if this gets me out of here, then I'm going to admit that I have this. Theresa refused to let her out because, oh, I don't believe you. You're lying, blah, 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 and everything. And so on June 21st, 1985, a year after her sister, Sheila ended up dying as well. However, her mother and her siblings wouldn't know about it for another 3 days when the smell of her decomposing body finally started going through the apartment. When she finally looked at Sheila, the poor girl had already started decomposing so bad that, like, later on when they were able to pull evidence from that closet floor later on for the trial and everything. Like, Terry was like quoted as saying like she had to go back and scrub the closet and stuff, and like pieces of her sister's face were on that floor. Like, that's how bad this girl decomposed already.
Oh my God.
And it was hot too. And so she ended up calling her son and asking him to bring home a big box from his movie theater job. And they ended up stuffing Sheila's hog-tied body into it before they disposed of her near an airport near Truckee, California. Okay. Sheila was found within a few hours after she was like dumped and stuff, but she was so decomposed that she was technically unidentifiable as well.
So they have two randomly dead bodies that are unidentified. Yep. So they can't link them.
Yep. And if you listen to the Cold Case, the podcast, Cold Case Files, the podcast episode, they really go into it with the detectives going like, we have no clue what is going on here. Do we have a serial killer? Is there like, they didn't even know these two girls were related.
Well, and their cause of death was different.
Yeah. So it's hard to say and everything. So Sheila ended up dying because of dehydration and right. all of that stuff. And her sister Susan ended up dying because of sepsis and stuff. So there was no reason.
Sepsis and then smoke inhalation and being burned alive.
There really was no reason to there really was no reason to connect both cases and stuff. So it was just, they were just cold cases and stuff. So when they got back to the apartment, Theresa was so concerned about the smell of decay that was still in the house that she made Terry she had made Terry scrub the closet and stuff. And like when Terry eventually went in for interviews and stuff, she said what the closet smelled like and what she saw and everything. It was really, it's really terrible. But when the smell wouldn't come out after she cleaned it, she basically made Terry set fire to the entire apartment and meet them at a hotel. So that night, Terry took 3 gallons of gasoline and all over the apartment and set it on fire. Well, the neighbors were smart and got a hold and like caught a hold of it, and they were able to put the apartment fire out and stuff. But the smell had been covered up. The crime scene had been cleaned up. Even though the closet was like completely untouched, they didn't know that somebody had died in there. They thought that, so they basically just rebuilt the inside of the apartment and went on with life. However, like I said before, the closet that Sheila was in was not damaged at all by the fire. And years later, when they brought Theresa to trial, they were able to pull up like the floorboard, the under tiles, and get DNA showing that Sheila was actually in that closet. So after that night, Theresa basically went into hiding with her kids. But Terry knew, like, my two sisters are dead. Like, I'm gonna be next. So she was like, "Nah, I'm getting out of here." So she ended up telling her mom, I'm leaving and all this other stuff and everything. So she took her sister's ID and she basically vanished to get away from her mom. She said, like, in the interview in the Cold Case podcast, she said, like, the last time I had ever seen my mom, like, me and my friend were driving and I saw her and I got out and I was like, "Hey, Mom," and everything. Because, like, she's still my mom and everything. And she said hey to her, and they ended up having a drink together and they got drunk. And Theresa had a gun in her purse, and she took the gun out and put it in front of Terry and was like, "You know that you're not supposed to ever talk about what happened, right?" Terry's like, "No, Mom, I'm never going to do that." And so, like, Terry was like, "That was the last time I ever saw my mom." But Terry didn't, like, just keep it to herself. Like, she literally told everyone, like, anybody and everybody who would listen to her. She told therapists, she told doctors, she told police officers. Unfortunately, nobody believed her. Like, nobody believed her because they thought that she was crazy because she already had a record and she had drug abuse issues. So they thought that she was just talking crazy because there was no trail of, like, these girls that died and stuff. Like, yeah, I mean, there were birth certificates and stuff, but again, it was the 80s. So it was like, you can't really go online and search and stuff. So Terry grew really tired of, like, nobody taking her seriously, but she ended up seeing an America's Most Wanted episode about two Jane Does found in Placer County, California in 84 and 85, which is where her sisters were found. It was her sisters. So Terry immediately, like, reached out to the number and everything. She's like, "Look, I believe I have information on the two Jane Does. I believe that those are my sisters that my mom killed." And the police officer's like, "Okay, well, why don't you come in and we'll listen to your story."
It's really great that this gave her an outlet to tell her story to somebody who would believe her, because she had this proof, right? Whereas, she can tell people about it, but without the proof, it does kind of sound crazy, because what kind of mother does this sort of thing to her children? I mean, really, when you take a step back and you look at it from your average point of view, somebody who's not into true crime, any of those things, it's one of those things where you look at it and go, "Oh, okay, yeah, your
Like,
mom
okay, yeah,
killed
your
your
mom
two
totally killed
sisters,
your sibling. Like,
yeah, like, what kind, there's no way that somebody's that crazy."
yeah,
Well,
like, okay, your mom totally killed your siblings. Like, true. Yeah, no, the America's Most Wanted episode was completely, like, surprising to her. She did not think that they were going to actually do an episode on it. She didn't think. So when she saw it, she was like, "Oh my God." So she ended up, like, going in and speaking to the detectives and stuff. And the detective, like, came in and, like, sat her down. He had the whole case file so he could either prove or disprove Terry's story and everything. And, like, he asked Terry about, like, certain things and stuff. He asked her, he's like, "Well, how do you think she died?" or something. Like, "How do you think she died?" and everything. And she's like, "Oh, I can tell you she had sepsis and everything. And I can tell you that there was and she told him about how she got sepsis, about digging the bullet out. And they backed it up with the fact that the body had a long open wound on their back that was consistent with an X-Acto knife. And, like, she brought up the fact that, like, the police, like, they asked her about the diapers and stuff, because Sheila's body was not Sheila, but Susan's body was burned with diapers, with adult diapers and stuff. And she told him, she was like, "Well, it's because my mom would not let her go to the bathroom in her final days, basically, and stuff. She had to defecate in them and everything." And, like, she even brought up, without their prompting, like, what kind of, like, jewelry they had and stuff, like what kind of jewelry that they had that was burned with them and everything. So like they were like, okay, yeah, this girl is definitely telling the truth and
Right.
stuff. And
Yeah.
so she was able to back up the entire story and be able to point out like who did it. So detectives ended up arresting William, her brother, in Woodland, California in 93, where he worked. And they actually found out that Robert was actually already serving a 16-year sentence for killing a bartender a few years before in LA, Nevada. Yeah. So they ended up finding Theresa taking care of their landlord's 83-year-old mother. Yeah. And at first, Theresa pled like not guilty. Like if you listen to the cold case file episode and stuff, like Teresa's on there and they're like, well, do you know that you're getting arrested and charged with 2 counts of murder? And she goes, what? I am? No, nobody told me. And the guy's like, well, this is me telling you that you're getting arrested with 2 counts of charged with 2 counts of murder. And she goes, oh. And he goes, so did you do it? Like he basically asked her, she goes, no, why would anybody do that to their kids? Like just being like, they tried to see if she was competent to stand trial. And she was very competent to stand trial and everything. She was found competent, but she tried to like play it off that she was crazy. Well, she kept going with the not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty plea until she found out that her 2 sons were basically rolling over on her for a lesser deal. Like William ended up getting parole and Robert actually only got 3 more years on top of his 16-year sentence. And so Theresa was like, oh, okay, yeah, I definitely got to buckle down. Like, whatever, I got to buckle down. So she pled guilty and she ended up getting a 2 consecutive life sentences. She's technically eligible for parole in 2027. However, I don't think that's going to happen. I really don't.
I hope not, because holy shit, excuse my language.
I mean, this woman killed 3 people. She killed her first husband. She killed
Mhm.
2 of her children. Like, I'm sitting here
Mhm.
like, what?
Yeah. Well, and it says a lot with with the way that she treated her children, it's not surprising that she has children with a criminal record.
Right.
Only because that is the reference point they have for how adults are supposed to act, right? I'm not saying that gives them any kind of excuse for how they behaved.
No.
But I think that, when you don't have any kind of role model in your life aside from someone who, handcuffs your sister, cuts her back open, and then when she gets sepsis, burns her alive. I don't know that that's a really good reference point to how adults are supposed to behave.
And when you're young, if that's all you know when you're young,
Right.
it's not gonna turn out well for you. It's really not.
Well, and it's also the fact that when you look at it, so they all dropped out of school by the time they were in the 8th grade. So they didn't have any other adult role models really in their life. Like,
Yeah.
that's one of the redeeming things of the school system. Let's be upfront and honest here. Like, there are teachers who can really become a good role model and ear, and, it would have been very easy for a teacher to be like, why do you have
Like,
these
what the
marks?
heck is
What's
going
going
on
on?
here?
Right. And I don't know. I couldn't tell you what kind of systems were in place in 1976, but I can tell you that if somebody didn't show, like, dropped out, if all of the children of a family consecutively dropped out of school in the 8th grade, they'd be going to check it out now.
Right? Like
Uh, so
nowadays, if that happens nowadays, it's like, yeah, no,
right.
they are checking that out real quick. Like CPS is at your stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, they are. So, but again, CPS is way more of a thing now than it was then.
Yeah, true.
And I think that it's possible that Terry's claims would have been taken maybe a little more seriously now.
Yeah.
But, it's hard to say, because how long has Sarah Turney been trying to get her stepdad
Dude, right?
convicted? And then we've got it, there's also the other issue with the fact that it's like what we see with Karen Bodine and what we see with the Jeff Davis 8 is that people who have a history of that high risk lifestyle, right? Prostitution, drug use, those things that often come with a record.
Yeah.
It's hard for them to take a death seriously.
Oh, yeah.
Whether it be them reporting it or the victim, because they look at it and go, well, it's this really bad stigma of like, well, they were asking for it by living this high risk lifestyle. And I'm sorry, nobody's really asking for it. And if they're asking for it, they're suicidal, and that's a whole other ball of wax. You know what I mean? Like, so
exactly. And I mean, even it doesn't, like, in my mind, it doesn't matter like what, like, I guess it doesn't matter like what lifestyle you choose to live anyways. Nobody deserves that. Like,
no. And I definitely don't think anybody deserves to be raised like that. I mean, obviously I can't swoop in and save every, person, but I think that abuse is a real issue.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, there were, and some people are lucky enough to get out of it and still live very meaningful lives or happy lives. And some people, it destroys them from the inside out. I mean, even Walt Disney was somewhat abused as a child. He and his brother had to walk in shoulder height snow to go deliver newspapers for their father because he wasn't going to do it. So he made them do it for free. And that's a whole bunch of other things, but
that's on a whole different story.
Right. It really is. But it's the point of, there was an era where child abuse wasn't uncommon.
Oh, yeah.
But this is a whole different level.
Oh my God, right?
And like, somebody who...
Like, the level that this reminds me of, honestly, is, oh gosh, what is her name? The girl who was abused by the woman that was supposed to be taking care of her. Sylvia Likens. You've never... Oh my gosh, looks like we've got another case to do. So basically, Sylvia Likens was basically... she... Long story short, she went to go stay with this lady because her family was traveling circus performers. Her and her sister went to go stay with this lady, and this lady basically ended up letting... This lady abused her. This lady got her kids and like the neighborhood kids to abuse her, and eventually it got to the point where Sylvia ended up passing away from her injuries. And it was bad. Like recently, this lady's daughters was like found out that she was working at an elementary school like recently and stuff, and it came out and like all this stuff. So it's crazy. But like that's literally what this reminds me of and stuff. And it just kind of blows my mind that like women can be like so just filled with jealousy and rage towards their own kids. Like this was the whole reason why she did that to these girls, is because she was so jealous of what they looked like. She was jealous that she didn't have that youth and that beauty and all that stuff anymore.
So instead of looking at it as how can I fix it for myself, she looked at it as, let me just make, it's your common bullying issue. Like, I'm going to make you feel bad so I feel better about myself.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bully. Yep. And it doesn't matter if you're doing it to somebody else, but especially not your children. Like, that's just not.
Yeah. So Terry, Teresa's youngest daughter, actually ended up getting married and settling down. She was finally happy that her sisters received the justice that they deserved in the end. Yeah. She was actually quoted as saying, "I want them to know that they are loved and that they are missed. I always miss them." Unfortunately, Terry did end up passing away in 2011 from heart failure. So I do kind of hope that when she went, she was able to be reunited with her sisters once again.
Thank you for listening to True Crime and Chill. For more information, including case notes, photos, and sources, visit our website at truecrimeandchill.com. You can also stay connected with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Look for new episodes from us each week on Tuesdays.